President Pierre Nkurunziza is back in Burundi after loyalist troops foiled an attempted coup earlier in the week. Now, there was heavy fighting on Thursday, culminating in the arrest of 3 generals for their role in this attempted coup. But where does this leave one of East Africa's smallest country? And also, what does it tell us about the cohesion and the policy direction of the leaders of these 5 nations? We'll be answering those questions live from Bujumbura in the next half hour. Welcome to this edition of Global Business Africa. Here's what's coming up. The United States has voted to extend AGOA, but it's targeting South Africa. And a different kind of agriculture is turning millions for Zimbabwean farmers. We'll be with those reptiles in just a bit. Now, calm has returned to the streets of Burundi's capital, Bujumbura, on Friday, after authorities said they had arrested 3 generals for their role in an attempted coup in the wake of a day of heavy fighting. President Pierre Nkurunziza also went back to Burundi late on Thursday after heavy fighting for control of the state radio headquarters and frequent gunfire in the capital. The streets of Bujumbura are deserted for most of Thursday, but many ventured out of their homes on Friday after the mutiny was quelled by forces loyal to the incumbent head of state. More than 20 people have been killed so far, according to an unofficial tally by activists, and scores more have been wounded. The UN Refugee Agency, UNHCR, says over 105,000 people, let me repeat that, over 105,000 people have fled Burundi to seek refuge in neighboring countries.
The things we had yesterday shocked us. Some people tried to ruin Burundi, but God loves Burundi, and we're still here. We woke up early today and there were barricades in Buyenzi, but people have been able to move freely. We managed to come here to the CBD. Although there are not many cars on the streets, there are no public transport at the moment, so we are walking everywhere.
All we've been hearing for the past 2 to 3 days is gunfire and heavy explosions. We've also had protests by many people, but yesterday and the day before, there was a lot of fighting around the national broadcaster. But we thank God that we are alive today. It is a little peaceful today. We thought everybody would have fled the country by now, but God has been good to us. All we ask is for President Nkurunziza to protect every soul in this country.
Now, in news further afield, the U.S. administration must make more aggressive use of the tools in the recently updated African Growth and Opportunity Act, AGOA, to pressure South Africa to comply with its conditions. That at least is the argument being made by the American Senator Orrin Hatch. Now, the Utah Republicans spoke ahead of a 97-1 Senate vote to extend the act for another 10 years. Hatch voiced concern about moves by the South African government to require majority local ownership of security companies, and also to shortcomings in what he described in South Africa's intellectual property laws. Another senator, Johnny Isaacson, who's been championing the cause of U.S. chicken exporters, was aggrieved by South Africa's anti-dumping duties, and he wanted the U.S. trade representative to consider whether South Africa was making continual progress towards respecting private property and minimizing government interference in the economy as a whole. Let's get the latest details now from Lorna Shaddick. She's live in Washington for us. Lorna, when the AGOA Extension and Enhancement Act does eventually go to the House of Representatives, will it have the same ease of passage over there as it did in the Senate on the 14th of May?
Well, the short answer is I think it will. It's unlikely to face many political obstacles in the House, and that's because, just like in the Senate, really there is quite broad bipartisan support for this renewal of AGOA for another 10 years. In the Senate, though, we did see at one point it looked like AGOA might be fall victim to that Democrat rebellion over Trade Promotion Authority, the so-called fast-track TPA, earlier this week. In the end, of course, the vote on AGOA was separate from TPA, which meant that it went through without any hitches. But the question now is whether the same will happen in the House, whether the House leadership decides to allow a separate vote on AGOA, or whether it is bundled up with Trade Promotion Authority in order to try and attract more democratic votes. So we will have to wait and see whether that is the case. I think the House is likely to wait until TPA has gone through the Senate, so we're looking probably at about mid-June. But really, I think there's the desire here in Washington to get this sorted out well before President Obama's trip to Kenya, which of course is happening in mid-July.
Indeed. I should also point out at this point that Angelo Coppola is on the line from Johannesburg, South Africa. Welcome to the conversation, Angelo. The bill that the Senate passed on Thursday had several measures in it targeting South Africa. Lots of anger there from legislators towards Africa's most advanced economy. What's the reaction in Pretoria?
Well, Raman, to say that the reaction has been muted is to understate it. In fact, the DIRCO Minister, Mashabane, alluded to it during her briefing this morning. The government, she says, are studying the contents of the bill. And the minister noted, of course, that the duration of AGOA 2, as she's called it, has been shortened to 10 years from the original 15 years. So it seems like there's a bit of anxiety around that. But I guess I'm going to have to wait for a formal response, and that's probably only going to come once the final confirmation of this bill goes through Congress. Raman?
Indeed. Lorna, let's get back to you. Given the billions that the American government spends subsidizing its own farmers, how do legislators in both houses of Congress not see that as an unfair competitive edge when they're busy demanding access to less developed, much smaller South African markets?
Well, I guess what the US would say is that trade negotiations, of course, are done on a per sector basis, and all of their agricultural subsidies, they say, are fully compliant with the WTO rules. And secondly, the poultry industry, which is the one that is in particular concerned about its access to the, or rather lack of access to the South African market, isn't subsidised by the US government in any way. And they would add, in fact, that the access that they are demanding to the South African market and the problem they have is over anti-dumping duties, which aren't really analogous to subsidies at all. And the poultry industry also isn't actually asking for full access, merely access to part of the poultry market in South Africa. That being said, though, of course, the US poultry industry is very competitive, and it may well have some impact on consumer poultry prices in South Africa if it does get that access. But I think really the big reason that the US is seeking to use this renewal of AGOA to have a conversation with South Africa about these trade issues is because ultimately it wants to use AGOA renewal as a springboard to work towards a bigger free trade agreement or economic partnership agreement along the lines of the one that South Africa currently enjoys with the European Union. The US, many US companies and industries are saying that they now are suffering from a disadvantage because of that agreement with the EU, and they want to work towards their own similar agreement with South Africa.
Indeed, Angelo, South Africa's main objection to opening up its poultry sector, to be specific, to the United States, is that mainly driven by the competitive edge that American farmers do get from government subsidies, or is there more to this story than just a question of subsidies?
Well, the South African farmers, besides the poultry farmers, in fact, all of the South African farmers can't compete against any country that subsidizes its agricultural sector. And while the poultry sector in the US isn't subsidized, it's the same issue in South Africa. It's cheaper for the American market or the producers to produce that portion of the chicken that they can sell here locally. And it kind of takes away from the market locally. And the bottom line here is that they're looking to create food security in South Africa. That's the authorities. And they're trying to do it via local production. And their reasoning is that they can't do it if foreign entrants are coming into the market producing products cheaper, because then the local industry then gets reduced and eventually dissipates, much like the textile industry here. The issue really is that government doesn't have the resources to support the financial or that sector financially. So it appears that by blocking cheaper products and introducing duties, it's going to take care of that balance in the market locally. Raman?
Indeed. One final question for you, Lorna. Even after falling by over 80%, or roughly 80% since 2011, why is it that oil still dominates AGOA imports by the United States, yet that only benefits a handful of oil producers like Nigeria and Angola?
Well, you're right, it certainly does still dominate, although it is worth stressing non-oil exports have increased quite a lot. In 2011, they were at $4.5 billion. That's well up from $1.2 billion back in 2001, just after AGOA was introduced. So the picture is improving somewhat. But for many African countries, certainly when AGOA was introduced all the way back in 2000, the infrastructure and the skilled labour needed to produce those kind of value-added products was very small scale and still developing. And indeed still is developing now, although of course those businesses are growing quite a lot. And that is in fact one thing that this new bill is seeking to address. There's a clause in there calling on AGOA beneficiaries to develop something called utilisation strategies, setting out just how they're going to take advantage of the benefits that they receive under AGOA, setting up, for example, promoting small business entrepreneurship and that kind of thing, looking for obstacles to increase trade and investment and dealing with them. But and the USTR, as part under the bill, also will have to devote resources to helping those countries develop those kinds of programs. But perhaps another big problem facing African countries when it comes to diversifying away from oil is that, of course, agriculture is one of the biggest export sectors in Africa. And unfortunately, African agricultural exports are still stuck at around 3% in terms of the total of US exports. That's partly because, of course, the the sanitary and phytosanitary standards here in the US are very high and potentially quite difficult to meet, but also because tariff rate quotas here in the US are still a big problem for African agricultural exporters. They're based on a time when the trade between the US and Africa was a lot lower and a lot more minimal, and it is very hard at the moment for African countries to break into that.
Indeed, we'll leave it there for the time being. Thank you both for your input. Lorna Shattuck live in Washington, and of course Angela Coppola, as always, live in Johannesburg, South Africa. On to East Africa now. Kenya's Jomo Kenyatta International Airport in the capital, Nairobi, has opened an entirely new terminal that will handle an additional 2.5 million passengers a year. Terminal 2, as it's called, is designed to handle that much passengers. It has 60 check-in positions, 32 air bridges and 8 remote gates. It's already being used by a couple of airlines, Fly540, SAX, Juba, African Air Express among them. The Kenyan Airports Authority is also constructing another terminal, the Greenfield one, but that is way bigger. It'll have an estimated handling capacity of about 20 million passengers a year.
What we want to achieve is to restore Nairobi to its former glory and truly make it the regional hub of East and Central Africa. It is going to need more than just a new airport. We will want the county government, indeed, as he said, to play their part. We need to clean up our city. We need to improve our traffic flows. We need to light up our city. We need to improve our facilities as well to be more or less in tandem with the kind of airport that we envision to have.
Let's get back to a lead story earlier in the day. Come, of course, returning to the capital of Burundi, Bujumbura, on Friday. Later on Thursday, the incumbent president, Pierre Nkurunziza, came back into the country. A couple of generals, 3 at least, that we know of, and a couple of other junior officers who were involved in the attempted coup early in the week have been arrested. Let's get the latest now from our correspondent who's in the country. Kofa Mrenje is live in Bujumbura right now. Kofa, the government spokesman said simply that the coup plotters will be held answerable. Do we know exactly what that means? Are they going to be tried in a civilian court or court-martialed? What happens next?
Well, Rama, that's the same question that we were asking the Minister for Security here. What next then for those who have been captured? And he says, you know, the president had said earlier on Thursday that he was willing to forgive those who had taken part in that coup plot, but under one condition, that they voluntarily surrender and apologize to the people of Burundi for their actions. However, he says, as it stands at the moment, they will be taking them into custody, question them. They were frisked to, they were taken to an unknown destination. But he says, yes, we are going to take them to court, and the law will take its course. We do not know as at the moment exactly on what charges they will be facing, but he has said that they will be taken to court, and you know, the court will make its ruling on what they were involved in.
Indeed. So far, there are over about 105,000, if I remember the UNHCR numbers correctly, citizens from Burundi who fled to the Democratic Republic of Congo, up north into Rwanda or into Tanzania as well. Has this violence essentially accelerated the outflow of refugees from the country?
Well, it depends with whom you ask here. You ask the local people living in and around the city, and they say, yes, they are worried that whatever is happening in the country might lead to more people leaving the country and fleeing into neighboring countries because they don't know what is going to unfold in the coming days because the situation still remains fragile. The government, of course, says and firmly affirms that it is now in control. But you asked the government, we were speaking with the government spokesman here, and he said the situation actually is improving at the moment. About 5,000 or more people have started coming back into the country, and they are pleading and asking more, and many of those who are still who had still fled into neighboring countries to come back so that they exercise their democratic right to vote in the upcoming elections.
Indeed. One final question for you, Kofa. Based on the reactions of some of the citizens that you've spoken to in the week or so you've been there, are they critical of how the East African community has responded to this bid for a third term? Do they think East African presidents could and should have done more to stop this crisis before it even started?
Yes, of course. Many of them say it was about 2 weeks after the protests started here, and they are condemning the international community and, most importantly, the East African community for not intervening soon enough. They believe that if action would have been taken earlier enough, then probably the country would not have gotten to this level. But they also express some dissatisfaction with the position that was taken by the East African community heads of states. They say their message here, those who are against the president say, their message is that the president should not run for another term. It's that simple. However, the heads of states had agreed that the elections had to be postponed until, you know, a sense of calm returns into the country. But yes, they are not happy with the East African community in particular.
Indeed, we'll have to leave it there for the time being. That's Kofa Mrenje live in Bujumbura, a city, of course, that has been in turmoil for most of this week, especially in the wake of that attempted coup. Let's make a quick run now through the markets. A fairly tepid day right across the board today. The Nigerian All-Share Index barely moving, essentially listless day for that particular index. Gains of less than 0.1%. They're pretty much the same thing in Nairobi. However, with the JC All Africa Index up by about 0.5 percentage point. Year-to-date gains are fairly strong as well, much better than her sub-Saharan peers. Coming up next, power sector experts are in South Africa for the African Utility Week. And the Kenyan Wildlife Service has set up a forensic lab to protect elephants in Eastern and Central Africa.
Sustainable development and a commitment to developing partnerships with Africa. Some of the key phrases already used at the Africa Global Business Forum here in Dubai.
There is a need for a predictable environment in which investors have to put their money.
Welcome back to the program. You're watching Global Business Africa. Now, the annual Africa Utility Week concluded in Cape Town, South Africa, right as a time where the country is experiencing a crippling power crisis, which is predicted by some to last for at least the next 3 years. More than 5,000 energy experts converged in the forum, charged with developing strategies to deal with Africa's perennial power problem. CCTV's René Del Cam was there.
The theme of this year's conference was Clean Power Africa, referring to the much-needed, sustainable, renewable energy in South Africa and the rest of the continent at the moment.
I must say that this event couldn't have come at a better time, especially where South Africa is faced with the challenges around the security of supply. As you know, we've been going through load shedding. So I think we're lucky that we've got really over 5,000 delegates across the continent who have come to Cape Town to be able to discuss some of the issues that are very pertinent when it comes to the issue of electricity, the utilities within the country.
City Power's Sicelo Kulu was named the Best Executive of the Year at the African Utility Week Awards. Many others, including power companies in Kenya and Uganda, received accolades for their energy efficiency. More and more private South Africans have started generating solar power and feeding back into the country's national energy grid. In 2014, the city of Cape Town signed up with the commercial Black River Park office complex behind me, which provides solar power to many international high-end tenants, as well as the city itself.
I appreciate that the city really did apply themselves and eventually got the grid tie-in happening, and the mayor was here to celebrate it, and the head of renewable energy was here to celebrate it with us and came to sign the agreements with us. And that really indicated how forward-thinking the city of Cape Town was.
Pierre-Jacques Rabi says his company imported what it believes to be the highest quality photovoltaic panels from South Africa's biggest trading partner, China.
We will forever need electricity. Our tenants will need electricity from us. And this long-term guaranteed income is fantastic from an investor's point of view. So for 20 years, the production of the panels is guaranteed. And that just quietly sits on the roof making money.
Many experts at the 2015 Africa Utility Week said they were excited about some of the new innovation and technology, especially pilot projects such as load limiting, which was recently introduced in certain parts of South Africa. This will give customers an option where they can continue to have limited power during load shedding instead of being totally in the dark. Renee Dalcom, CCTV, Cape Town.
Back in East Africa, Kenya's Wildlife Service has opened a forensic laboratory to boost efforts to fight poaching, in the East African region as a whole. Now, the organization plans to start a DNA database that will give information on ivory and meat from animals obtained from poachers.
This forensic lab in Kenya's capital, Nairobi, is the second of its kind in sub-Saharan Africa. South Africa already has a similar one running. Moses Otiende is a molecular biologist at the lab.
So our lab basically has got 3 key mandates. One of them is to do bushmeat analysis. And then the other mandate that we're going to be taking keenly is the development of the rhinoceros DNA index. And thirdly is the elephant database that we're going to use for prosecutorial purposes. So among the things you're going to be doing here is to distinguish bushmeat, suspect bushmeat that are submitted to us by investigators to species level.
The lab is supported by the World Wildlife Fund, among other partners, and will also serve East and Central Africa. Poaching has surged in the last few years across sub-Saharan Africa, where poachers kill elephants and rhinos to feed demand for ivory and horns. A 2014 UN and Interpol report estimated that about 25,000 elephants were killed in Africa every year, out of a total population of around 650,000. Dr. Francis Gakuya, head at the KWS Veterinary and Capture Services Department, says clamping down on poachers needs cooperation from various agencies to be effective.
I tend to believe this is a very great initiative for wildlife conservation in this country. It's enhancing use of science in fighting wildlife crime, because for wildlife crime to be controlled or eradicated finally, because that should be the goal, then we require a number of approaches, from security issues, enforcement, and even science. So we're really incorporating science to make sure that we fight wildlife crime.
In March, Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta led the country in banning 15 tons of ivory in the anti-poaching fight. The leader also promised to destroy its entire stockpile this year. The government has also deployed surveillance drones to help fight elephant and rhino poachers.
Initially, we did not have that capacity, especially when a bushmeat case comes through. Most of the traders and the poachers were deboning it. It was the method that was used to differentiate between meat from wild and domestic animals was using anatomical features. But now when you debone, that cannot be used. So now DNA will differentiate whether the product is deboned, whether it's cooked, whether it's processed. You will be able to differentiate, to identify and differentiate the species level.
Kenya has already imposed stiffer penalties, including longer jail terms and bigger fines for wildlife poaching or trafficking, citing the menace is harming tourism, a major earner of foreign exchange. Susan Mongeli, CCTV.
Now, if you're looking at the crude oil numbers and wondering why exactly that pullback is coming through, well, look no further than production data. IEA has pointed out that OPEC is pumping about 2 or so million more barrels than the market actually needs right now. So essentially, you've got production well ahead of demand, and that essentially means the glut, combined, of course, with the storage you're seeing in the US, will be there for quite a while. Now, on to agriculture of a somewhat different kind now. Zimbabwe. Crocodile farming over there might be a niche business at the moment, with skin exports of about $30 million a year, but that's a sector that is keen to grow. The thing is, though, setting up a breeding farm can take as long as 5 years, and these reptiles don't just eat anything. They want a special diet.
The Crocodile and Nature Sanctuary near Victoria Falls exported 130 tons of crocodile meat last year. They sold over 40,000 crocodile skins, mostly to the European market, but increasingly to Asia and Australia as well. The crocodile exports earned the sanctuary over $500,000 in profits in 2014.
And on the bags, the expensive one, it's $1,475. Okay, and the least we can say the cheapest one is around $200 and something.
The industry currently employs over 1,000 people, with at least 100,000 crocodiles bred every year. But the Crocodile Farmers Association of Zimbabwe says the seasonal nature of the animal's breeding pattern makes relying on a steady income difficult.
They mate in the middle of April, May, June and July. And then they lay their eggs between August and September and hatch in November and December, meaning the eggs take 3 months to hatch.
Those crocodiles that aren't killed for their meat or hides serve as a tourist attraction. Feeding time is usually a highlight for visitors, and with Zimbabwe's economy still struggling to recover, at least there's one sector that's turning a profit. Valdi Carlsa, CCTV.
All right, then a quick run through currencies here for you. The South African rand very much on course to actually have its 4th straight day of gains against the American dollar. More dollar weakness really than a story of strength from the rand per se. The Kenyan shilling 95.85 coming through partly because liquidity on the Kenyan side is a bit squeezed. But remember, some interesting developments might happen on the other side. Corporate taxes are due to be paid sometime next week, so a lot of Kenyan firms will be selling off the dollars they've been accumulating over the last couple of weeks. That's it for this edition of the program. As always, we welcome your feedback. globalbusinessafrica@cctv.com is the email address to use. And as always, Facebook and Twitter is where the news continues 24/7. We'll see you over there. And of course, next week on Monday.